I've mentioned in previous videos a concept that I call signal cultivation. I honestly cannot remember if I read that in some textbook somewhere on photographic developments and processing, or if that's just my term for strengthening an apparent signal. But either way, let me take a moment to explain the concept. By signal cultivation, I'm referring to the process of making a signal seem to be stronger than what it is, or increasing the apparent signal. The actual signal is the result of integration time, or total time that you have spent imaging the target, and there's no working around that, not to my knowledge. But you can enhance the apparent strength of a signal so that it looks like you have been on target for even longer. The strength of this process is whatever DSO you are developing will look more solid, more material, more real, and right there in front of you. It will also strengthen the appearance of any definition that presently exists in the signal, so small details such as variations in color, texture, or dynamic range, if they exist in the information you currently have, you can amplify them and thus bring them out more. However, this technique should not be confused with the value of actual integration time. Actually spending time on the target is going to reveal more and generally always be superior to techniques such as this. Put another way, actual integration time is going to reveal more of what is there. Also, working with apparent signal runs the risk of creating artifacts, but I can tell you after doing signal cultivation for many years that you can pretty well avoid artifacts. It just takes a little bit of work. In general, you have to be careful to watch your histograms. But this technique is definitely worth the effort. It can take a weak bit of signal and make it look to be much more than it is. For example, the image that you are looking at right now is the product of only, about 6.5 hours of total integration on the Eagle Nebula. I live in Canada, and presently the summer nights are very short, and I got 2 hours worth one night because there were some clouds that night that blocked the nebula for most of the night, and I got 4.5 hours more of integration time just a couple nights ago. Now, I probably won't be able to film this anymore for a couple weeks because we are coming into the full moon. So even if there are good clear nights coming, that's it for the Eagle Nebula for, say 10 days minimum, maybe 12. And that's because the full moon is going to be on the same side of the sky as the Eagle Nebula. They'll be too close to each other, so I'll have to wait to shoot it till a dark night. And since dark or moonless nights might not co-occur with clear nights of good seeing, it might be even longer till I can finish it. With projects like this one, where I'm hoping to get 20 to 30 hours of total integration time, it can take several months to complete a project like that. I have some projects that have been sitting on the back burner for 6 months and more. I don't compromise on my original information, and that allows me to get better images, but it does mean it can take a long time to complete an image. But by using signal cultivation, you have a workable image, something that you can show to others and, put on your astrobin or show to friends on Facebook or whatever, long before you finish a project. So, how did we get this much image out of so little integration time? Especially considering that I shot this with an SET, a Celestron 203mm or 8-inch SCT Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope that, with the focal reducer, still leaves you with about a 6.3 focal ratio. Well, let's dive in. So these two images are the luminance and combined RGB information, the results of that 6.5 hours of integration. They've been stacked, colors have been balanced with linear fit, and they have been aligned and combined. As you can see though, all by themselves, they don't really look like much, do they? We have some good solid starting positions to work with, but together they won't make much. Now, I do not composite together luminance and RGB information in PixInsight. To be frank, luminance and RGB combination in PixInsight is too prone to bugs and errors, and it's too picky. I would have to use a tool like the LRGB combination tool, which doesn't give me a lot of direct control of the process, or pixel math, which is tedious messing with all those formulae. So these days, once I have developed and combined my RG information into a single file, and have my luminance file ready to go, I export that over to my favorite layer-based photo editor, which is Affinity Photo, and then do the work there. And I want to emphasize you don't have to use Affinity Photo. I'm not trying to sell you an Affinity Photo. You could do this just as well with Photoshop, and I think GIMP, but don't take my word on that. It has been ages since I've touched GIMP, and it was much more primitive than it is now. I understand that GIMP has evolved into an excellent and powerful photo editing tool. And there are also other good non-destructive layer-based photo editors out there. But you're going to need a non-destructive layer-based photo editor that also features very powerful compositing options, and I know for sure that Affinity Photo and Photoshop both offer that, because compositing is key in signal cultivation. As you're going to see, we're going to use compositing over and over in the next steps. Okay, so I've opened Affinity Photo, and now I'm going to drag in the RGB image first. I could drag in the luminance image first, but then I would have to convert the canvas back to a color space, so doing it this way saves a couple steps. So I'll drag in my RGB plate, and then I'll drag in the luminance plate. Then the RGB plate, because it went in first, is labeled background. I'm just going to change its name to RGB LF for RGB linear fit. I label my backgrounds like that because I often use various color combination strategies, and if I've done color, say, calibration with a tool like spectrophotometric color calibration, then I would label it RGB SPCC. If I've used a different tool, I would label it with the initials for that different tool, just to remind myself which kind of calibration strategy or color balancing strategy that I'm working with. By the way, I have the snap tool turned on. The icon is circled top center, and this allows me to snap one layer right over the other, so that each layer that I drag in can quickly and easily be perfectly aligned over the layer below it. Once the images are in place, I'm going to select the luminance image and then go to the composite drop-down menu, or so known in Affinity Photo, the blend drop-down menu, and select the screen composite mode. What this does is it will tell the luminance image to add all of its information to the RGB image below it. You can see immediately the change. The image that we see on the screen becomes brighter. It also becomes more washed out because it's a lot brighter. But that's okay, we'll bring that back. This is all part of the signal cultivation process. And now, we're going to combine the image in both those channels. It's very simple. With both layers activated, you can tell that because the little white dots on the right of each layer have been clicked on, they're white. If they were off, those dots would be invisible. And to turn them on and off, all you have to do is click on those dots. But with both those dots clicked on and both layers selected, this means you have to click on both layers like you see now. I'm going to select Merge Visible. This will combine the two layers into a single new layer, combining all the luminance and RGB information. Simple as that. They are now blended for editing purposes. So far, we've just done a pretty regular L with RGB combination process, even though we took a different route to accomplish that. Now, let the cultivation begin. I've duplicated that new LRGB pixel layer and duplicated again and turned off the top layer. We're going to start by working with the second layer down, and I'm going to screen it again. Notice how when I do, all the information in that second layer gets added to the layer, the pixel layer below it. This increases the color, increases the saturation, increases the contrast, it increases everything within the image. We have now taken that fairly weak signal of just 6.5 hours and folded it over upon itself. You might say we've doubled it, though it's not really like 13 hours of integration. We only have 6.5 hours of information to work with. Now we're going to execute a little signal cultivation trick to go ahead and further strengthen the information while enhancing the quality of the colors and further enhancing contrast and definition. To do this, I'm going to turn on that topmost layer, and then I'm going to select a composite mode from one of the contrast class of blend modes or composite modes. In this case, I'm going to use soft light. I find that it very regularly works very well with the quality information found in astrophotography. Contrast modes bring down darks and emphasize whites. Soft light is a fairly gentle contrast mode, and it also works very well with the color in the image, by which I mean it doesn't really change it much. It's also really good with astrophotography because it doesn't tend to introduce artifacts, whereas some of the stronger composite modes such as overlay or vivid, well, they work well, sort of, but they often introduce artifacts. Even so, contrast blend modes are strong, so I don't want it at 100% strength. 57% looks perfect. Now, we have a signal that's well on its way toward good cultivation. Once again, we're going to select them all and merge them, blending all of that information together again. To help me keep track of these various pixel layers, often I label them because sometimes when developing an image, depending on how complex it is, I might do 10 or 15 of those merges. So I'm going to rename that pixel layer LRGBP for pixel layer. Now, we're moving in the right direction, but I want still a stronger image, a more cultivated signal. And it's going to take two parts to go about the next step. One is that I want more color information in the signal. I don't want to just amplify what's already in this image. I want to add more color information to the signal. So I'm going to go down to the original RGB layer, duplicate it, and drag it all the way up to the top. Once that layer is on the top, I'm going to play with a few composite modes till I find a good mode for adding the color from that RGB information to the information below. I really just want to add the color from that information to the information below. And a composite mode from the lighting group should do that. It'll add the information but not really emphasize the high frequency information, which is where our contrast and definition, the black versus white stuff is. Lighten is a pretty good composite mode for that, but even better is color dodge. Color dodge adds heavily to contrast and color, so it works very well for our purposes here, though it overbrightens the central elephant trunk formation. That's very easy to deal with. Using the paintbrush tool, I'll just mask out color dodge there. In Affinity Photo, you just select the paintbrush tool, it's circled over on the left, and then make sure that the paintbrush tool is set to mask. Set your hardness to 0 and your flow to around 20 and paint over the area when it change. As you can see, it's a process that goes quickly. Now I'm going to make that layer invisible, and we are going to enhance the color from our repeatedly composited and merged information below, the LRGB layer. The first thing I'm going to do is add a vibrance and saturation tool. And while I'm playing around with it, let me explain to you what this tool does, because people often get confused about the difference between vibrance and saturation. The saturation bar cranks up your strong colors. You might think of it that way. It cranks up your strong colors, or weakens them a great deal if you turn it all the way down. You can turn an image black and white with a saturation bar. Whereas vibrance focuses on enhancing your weaker colors. You're much safer using vibrance to enhance colors because it's less likely to saturation clip. But often you need to use that saturation bar because, as you can see in the information that's here, even though we've already repeated and blended the LRGB information repeatedly, the colors are still kind of weak. So I'm going to crank up the saturation and the vibrance. The strong colors here are the reddish colors, the weaker ones are the bluish colors, and I want to bring them both up. As I do this, I'm constantly watching the histogram on the top right to make sure neither side goes off the histogram, which would mean my colors have been clipped. Clipped colors is what leads to hypersaturation, posterization, and various chromatic artifacts. When I have the vibrance and saturation where I want them, I'm going to open up the channel mixer tool. Now this is an extremely powerful tool that you have to use delicately. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are with it, anytime you use it, you're probably going to have to tinker with it a bit. What the channel mixer tool does is changes the quality of the RGB evenly right across the entire color channel, from the dimmest renditions of the color to the brightest renditions of the color. So it's different from the curves tool. If you're familiar with changing color channels in the curves tool, and you would be if you watch many of my videos, changing color channels in curves changes the color in certain luminosity ranges. However, the channel mixer changes all of the color right across its full range of luminosity. But it's a powerful tool. With it, you can make an RGB image look like, for example, an SHO image. In this case, what I want to do is enhance the blues toward the center and enhance the reds toward the outside. Now, there is a loose process to do this. I say loose because it can vary depending on the image, but generally you start on the red channel, work your way down to the green channel, work your way to the blue channel. It might seem weird that the red channel has 3 color bars, red, green, and blue. The green channel has those 3 color bars, and so does the blue. But on the red channel, you're changing the characteristics specifically of red, green, and blue within the red presentation, the green channel, the red, green, and blue within the green presentation, and so on. It's a little confusing, but the more you play with this tool, the more you'll understand and get the knack of it. So what I'm going to do is use the channel mixer, this incredibly powerful tool, to strengthen the color presentation within this image. I want to really enhance and bring out those colors. I want redder reds, bluer blues, and I'll darken the black regions around the outside of the nebula while I'm at it. And it does take several iterations before I finally come out with an outcome that I'm really happy with. I'll just speed through that process. And near the end, I also turn on the RGB layer near the top to see the outcome. The color range that I'm happy with is one that creates nice color within the image and presents it strongly. We're doing signal cultivation, in particular color cultivation here. We want stronger colors to work with in the final image. Now, I have the blues where I want them, thanks to the channel mixer, but the reds aren't really where I want them. There's a little purple in them. However, it's easy to change. I can both enhance the blues and the reds, and the easiest way to do this is to change the overall color temperature of the image. And we do that with the white balance tool. I'm just going to cool the image a little bit, which is going to make those blues look really nice and bring out those reddish regions a bit better. The colors of the nebula look nice and strong now, but there is some blue and green in the space, and I want to selectively remove those. I'm going to do that with the Curves tool. I'll open it, and on the RGB palette, select the blue and green channels, and the Picker tool, and then go over the space, hold the left mouse button down, and drag down slowly, which will selectively extract the blues and the greens from those low luminosity ranges in the space. I like that. Now I want to enhance the red of the nebula, so I'm going to switch to the red channel and use the Picker tool and click and drag right across the red regions that I want to enhance, which will strengthen the red specifically in that luminosity range. I like where this is going, but now I want to adjust the luminance channel to emphasize a little contrast and bring out the dynamic range within the image. To do this, I open up the Curves tool again and select the lab color space and lightness. This is the equivalent of the luminance channel in PixInsight's Curves tool. Then I'm going to drag the curve at about 1/8 from the bottom and drag very slowly and gently to the right, which will just drag down the darkest colors just a little bit. Then I'm going to push up the middle of the curve line so that only the darker colors are brought down, but the brightness remains in the rest of the nebula. Then I'm going to go about 3/4 up the histogram curve, grab it and pull that down level with the histogram to even out the luminosity in the upper range of the image. Now, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Now, I'm going to make sure that all the layers that I'm currently working with are visible and select them all. And once again, we're going to merge them, which combines all of that information so that we are editing all of that information together, just in the same way that we would combine L, R, G, and B channels so we can work with them all together. Then, just to remind myself that they're no longer active, I'll turn off or make invisible all of the layers that I'm no longer using. Now I'm going to destroy that pixel layer, by which I mean I'm going to go to Filters and select Frequency Separation, select the maximum radius on the Frequency Separation tool and apply. And it's going to tear that pixel layer in half or divide it into high frequency and low frequency information. In the high frequency layer is where we find all the fine definition within an image, and in the low frequency, we find all the color and dynamic range information. With the high frequency layer selected, I'll open the unsharp mask so it opens in it, and slowly drag up the radius until I feel that I have the image at a sharpness that I want. Once I have the radius where I want it, I'll play around a little bit with the factor, and when the image is adequately sharp or sharp to my taste, then I'm going to further cultivate the sharpness by adding the clarity tool. The clarity layer needs to go above the unsharp mask in the high frequency information section. This way, it works with the unsharp mask. I will slowly crank up the clarity tool, which adds slight contrast in the mid-range area, which enhances the fine definition in that range. However, it can make certain regions that are already dark a little over dark, but I like what it's done with the elephant trunks in particular and the pyramid at the center of the screen. So I'm going to select the paintbrush, and with the clarity tool selected, I'll paint out the effect of the clarity tool just in the darkest little regions where the clarity has over contrasted things. What this does is paint a little bit of mask over the clarity tool. I have my flow set at 20% and my hardness set at 0. The flow controls how fast the removal of the clarity tool goes, so I can control just how much I want to remove. And the hardness set to 0 makes the brush very soft, so the changes naturally blend into the setting around where I'm making the changes, and that way it doesn't look like I've artificially stepped in there and executed a change. And when modifications of the clarity tool are done, we're going to further cultivate sharpness by adding a high pass filter. The high pass filter needs to go in the high frequency layer over the clarity layer, so it adds its operation synergistically to the clarity and the unsharp mask tools. To use the high pass filter, you have to change how it composites to the image. Select the soft light. You could use other composite modes, but soft light almost always works well. And then I'm going to slowly move up the slider bar. I never move it past 0.6 for astrophotography. I'll go from 0 to 0.6, and if I haven't reached as much sharpness as I think the image can take, then what I'll do is I'll duplicate the high pass filter. And in the duplicate, move the slider up a little bit again. If I reach 1.2 or 0.6 plus 0.6, I'll duplicate it again and move up as high as 1.8 and so on. I find this adds the sharpening effect of the high pass filter more gently to an image, which works very well with astrophotography images, where we're really working with very weak and faint signals. Now, we have taken our original and relatively weak 6.5 hours of integration in luminance and RGB, which looked like this, and turned it into this. Now, I think it's time to add some stars, and we are also going to cultivate the signal of the stars. I'm going to drag in a star plate, and Once it's in, I'm going to choose the color dodge composite mode. This is a way of adding stars to images that is not overwhelming to the delicate structure of DSOs. You can see there's a lot of stars in the star plate, and we want to tone them down. We want to keep their glow and their magic, but tone them down so they don't overwhelm the DSO. Color dodge, which you can see here, does that well. And screen, which you can see here, is nice, but also overwhelming. So let's go with color dodge. Now, while color dodge looks nice, it's not fair to the stars, you might say. There are a lot of stars in the image, and I want to bring them back, just in a way that works with the DSO. So you may have noticed on the right that I've already duplicated the stars layer. I'm going to go ahead and activate the duplicate layer now, and I've already set the screen mode, so once again those stars are overwhelming. But then I'll just drag the opacity slider all the way down to 0, and then slowly drag it up and find some position between, say, 25 and 50%. This will allow those background stars to show through but not be overwhelming, and it retains the magical glow of the stars that is especially well portrayed in the color dodge mode. And thus, by duplicating the RGB star layer and adding those two layers together, first with the color dodge and then the screen mode, we cultivate the signal of the stars, leaving them glowing but not overwhelming. Now there's just one more thing to cultivate. I want to cultivate the high frequency information specifically to enhance what little definition is to be found in this under-integrated image. And to do that, I'm going to steal the high-frequency information from the luminance layer. So in the layer panel on the right, I've duplicated the luminance layer and dragged it all the way up to the top to just below the stars. Once it's up there, I'm going to go back to the frequency separation tool and split the high-frequency information out of the luminance layer. Then I'm going to make the low-frequency information from the luminance layer invisible. Then I'll select the high frequency layer, make sure it's on the linear light composite mode, go to the opacity slider, tune the opacity slider all the way to 0 so the new high frequency information isn't overwhelming to the image. Then I'll slowly increase opacity until that additional high frequency information has added the definition that I'm looking for. In particular, I want to enhance the definition within the elephant trunk structures at the center of the nebula. Just 16% does this well. We're just trying to add just a little bit of structure to enhance the definition. However, it overdarkens the pyramid up top. So, with the erase tool selected and hardness at 0 and flow at 20%, I'll erase out the high frequency information from the luminance layer just over the pyramid structure and the border areas in the upper quarter of the image, so that they are not overly blackened by the additional high frequency information. And I'm sure all of you noticed that I flipped this image over before I started this final part of the editing. That's just because I'm used to seeing the image in this orientation. Working with it comes a little more natural to me. It's space, so there's no real up or down. I just like to view it from this perspective. And that's it. We now have a finished image that I'm saving. And thus, through the process of signal cultivation, we took that relatively weak 6.5 hours of integration and strengthened it until we were able to have this. It's not a final image, but it does look nice while I'm waiting till when one of these days I can finally get enough integration time. I figure at least 20 hours, maybe as much as 30, a process that could take weeks or months at this time of year, but until I can finally get enough to really show off the beauty of the Star Queen and her realm, the Eagle Nebula. As always, thank you for watching, and if you have any thoughts, questions, whatever, please leave them in the comment section below and I will try to get back to you. And as always, have a blast doing astrophotography. Thank you for taking part in this channel and helping it to grow so fast, and get out there and shoot the sky.